Major Tommy Macpherson was a highly decorated Scottish officer who became known as the Kilted Killer. His unconventional guerrilla warfare techniques caused so much havoc that at one point the infuriated Nazis put a 300,000 franc bounty on his head. In one of his most legendary maneuvers, the 23-year-old British Army officer protected a pivotal bridge in the Loire Valley. Around 23,000 Nazis were stationed at the bridgehead when Macpherson managed his way into enemy lines and faced Major General Botho Henning Elster. True to his reputation, the soldier single-handedly triggered the surrender of an entire Panzer division with no weapons, only his sharp intellect and a wee bit of bluffing. Seventh time's the charm. In the fall of 1941, 21-year-old Ronald Thomas Stewart Macpherson, member of the No. 11 Scottish Commando, arrived in North Africa. Tommy, as he was known to his peers, would be joining Operation Flipper, a secret commando team assembled by the British Army to strike the presumed headquarters of General Erwin Rommel. By mid-November, Macpherson and 3 fellow soldiers were stranded on a beach near Italian-occupied Beta Littoria after their rescue submarine failed to arrive. With no food, water, maps, or even proper clothing, they set march to Tobruk, a British-held town 200 miles away. However, the soldiers were stopped and captured by the enemy. While being interrogated by 4 army officers and 6 carabiners, one of the Italian officers asked Macpherson to show him how his automatic Colt pistol worked. The Scottish soldier obliged by trying to shoot them. Macpherson was sent to a prisoner camp and placed under solitary confinement, where he promptly tried to flee. He was then transferred to another site in Montalbo, where he attempted to jump over the property's fence. After 3 failed escapes, Macpherson was moved once again in June of 1941. This time, he was transferred to a special camp in Gavi, northwestern Italy, for soldiers who had attempted to flee from other prisons. The young soldier remained there until September 3, 1943, when the Armistice of Cassibile was signed and the Germans took over the area. After being transferred to another camp in northern Italy, Macpherson and his fellow Allied soldiers were sent to Austria. On the way there, he escaped, but was quickly recaptured and almost shot by enemy guards. Macpherson eventually arrived at the Stalag 18A camp in southern Austria, and soon became friends with New Zealand Captain Colin Armstrong. The 2 prisoners plotted to escape with the help of French prisoners who lent them their uniforms. Hiding from the Nazis as they took roll calls, the men fled on September 21st, along with Captain A.A. Yeoman. The 3 soldiers recrossed the Italian border and hoped to reach Yugoslavia to join Allied partisans. 5 days after the escape, Yeoman became separated from the group, and Macpherson and Armstrong encountered a German patrol team. Macpherson pretended to be an Italian officer and tried to convince the officers that Armstrong was Croatian. Still, the Red Cross rations gave them away, and they were recaptured. On September 30th, Macpherson arrived at another prison camp in East Prussia. A few days later, he was transferred to Torun, Poland. Finally, on October 9th, he attempted his 7th and final escape while wearing a French uniform. The Scotsman reached the Baltic coast and boarded a ship headed to neutral Sweden. Macpherson arrived in Scotland on November 4th, 1943. He was eventually awarded the Military Cross for his bravery during his time as a prisoner and for his actions in Operation Flipper. Set Europe ablaze. Immediately after returning to Scotland, Macpherson rejoined his commando unit. He arrived just in time for Operation Jedburgh, a unique and clandestine plan that would require his tenacious personality. Jedburgh would consist of 3-man teams of British, American, French, Dutch, and Belgian soldiers dropping by parachute into occupied France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. They would provide support to the French resistance following the Normandy landings. Macpherson's training lasted 3 months. He was then promoted to major in March of 1944 and assigned to lead Team Quinine, consisting of a French lieutenant and a British radio operator. In the early hours of June 8th, the Quinine team landed in Aurillac. As the man took off their jumping attire, a nearby Frenchman noticed Macpherson and told his boss, quote, Chef, there's a French officer, and he's brought his wife." Macpherson was wearing a Cameron Highland battle dress, complete with a tartan kilt. A proud Scotsman, Macpherson believed in standing out from the crowd. He later explained, quote, "As a British officer parachuted into a resistance situation, your only authority was your own personality, which I had tried to reinforce with my kilt and a degree of flamboyance." To motivate his young and inexperienced team, Macpherson went straight into action. As he spotted a substantial group of advancing Germans in the distance, the Scotsman asked his team to plant booby traps to slow them down, rather than engaging them directly. Throughout the night, the men cut down trees to block the road, hung grenades from the branches, and laid their only anti-tank mine on the ground. By the morning, the Germans brought heavy equipment to move the tree trunks and hit the mine. Meanwhile, Macpherson and his men sprayed troop carriers with their Sten guns and dashed into the forest before they could be noticed. The ingenious plan had worked. Similar continuous victories ensued, and it took Das Reich 2 weeks to get to their final destination, instead of 3 days as initially planned. By that time, the Allies had secured Normandy. Agent Quinine. During Operation Jedburgh, Macpherson and his squad left a path of destruction across Western Europe, destroying bridges or capturing German troops who crossed their way. It's believed that Team Quinine successfully conducted some form of operation on a daily basis. After Normandy, the war was swinging in the Allies' favor, and Macpherson became more brazen in his vendetta against the Nazis. The Scotsman even encouraged children to scatter nails in the streets to puncture the enemy trucks' wheels. To impress local citizens, he drove around in a black Citroën car, waving a Union Jack and a Cross of Lorraine, the flag of the Free French. One morning, he sat in full uniform at a cafe with the town's mayor to taunt the Germans. As a Nazi armored car swung into the square, Major Macpherson and his driver hopped into the Citroën and raced into the hills while being chased by the Germans. They then stopped and tossed a makeshift grenade into the German car, destroying it. Having had enough, the Nazis placed a 300,000 franc bounty on Major Macpherson's head. By then, he was already nicknamed Agent Quinine, or the Kilted Killer, and described as, quote, "a bandit masquerading as a Scottish officer and extremely dangerous to the citizens of France." An unexpected surrender. Despite Major Macpherson's successful guerrilla techniques, his greatest achievement ultimately happened without weaponry, only his intellect. With Allied forces now taking control of France, the Germans began to retreat. Enemy corps numbering 23,000 men and over 1,000 vehicles advanced through the last remaining gap between two Allied armies in the Loire Valley. Only a small group of French resistance soldiers guarded a vital bridge in the area. The severely outnumbered French fighters had no hope of winning. The Nazis had previously negotiated with the Allies to no avail, but Major Macpherson suggested another meeting in a nearby village. On September 16th, an unarmed Macpherson drove to the village's schoolhouse, accompanied by a French officer and a German doctor. He approached General Botho Henning Elster and told him that he was the operations leader and was ready to summon the Royal Air Force and unleash heavy artillery upon his column. According to Macpherson's biography, quote, "I told him that I was in contact with London by radio and could at any time call up the RAF to blow his people out of sight. In truth, the only thing I could whistle up was Dixie, but he had no way of knowing that." Major Elster stared at the 23-year-old Scotsman dressed in full Highland battle gear and agreed to surrender on the condition that his troops were allowed to keep their sidearms until they were under the custody of the U.S. 83rd Infantry Division. Macpherson agreed, peacefully taking over an entire Panzer division, securing the Loire bridgehead, and getting one step closer to the liberation of France. The Kilted Killer. When France was liberated, Major Macpherson traveled to Italy to help organize the Italian partisans in further efforts to evict the Germans. He parachuted down into northeast Italy in November of 1944 and sabotaged German lines occupying the Tarvisio commune. After World War II ended, Major Macpherson also became an enemy of communism. When Yugoslavia captured the Italian cities of Istria, Zadar, and Rijeka, Macpherson interfered and made sure the town of Trieste remained Italian. Yugoslavia's leader, Josip Broz Tito, was furious. Years later, in 1956, Macpherson was vacationing on the Italian side of the Yugoslavian border when he was summoned to meet Tito at his summer residence. When they met, Tito said to him, quote, "Ah, Macpherson, I've been looking forward to this meeting. We tried so hard to kill you." For his service in France, Italy, Palestine, Cyprus, Yugoslavia, Egypt, Libya, Lebanon, and Syria, Tommy Macpherson became recognized around the world as a warrior hero and one of the most determined and intelligent British soldiers of World War II. With 3 military crosses, 3 Croix de Guerre, 1 Legion d'Honneur, a Knight of Bachelor from the Queen, and even a papal knighthood, Colonel Sir Ronald Thomas Stewart Macpherson is the most decorated living soldier in the British Army's history.